Hello, I'm Polly Forcier of MB Historic Decor in Norwich, Vermont. Since 1972, I have recorded stencil designs from walls and floors. I have a friend whose house was filled with Rufus Porter's arresting murals of huge trees, harbor scenes, and entire villages. Houses, little boats, and clipper ships were all stenciled on top of the hand-painted murals. Knowing of my interest, she gave me Jean Lippman's book, Rufus Porter, Yankee Pioneer. It is the source, along with my own observations and study, of the information in this video. Rufus Porter, a 19th century phenomenon, was described in his time as being able to go around the world without a penny in his pocket. He was musical and artistic. He had teaching, literary, and inventive skills, as well as a free and adventurous spirit. We will concentrate on Porter as artist and teacher, for he believed that by giving instruction, anyone could create a wall mural. I wish to acknowledge the generosity of the current homeowners, the stewards of these treasured walls, in allowing me to share these murals with you. I hope you enjoy these 10 New Hampshire houses, where you will see 14 different walls from the Rufus Porter School of Mural Painting. The Joshua Eaton House, Bradford, New Hampshire, was built in 1814. 10 years later, 2 young men came on horseback and decorated a number of rooms in the house with stenciling and murals. These young men most certainly were Moses Eaton Jr., 28 years old, a relative of the owner, and Rufus Porter, age 32. 1824 is the year that Rufus Porter began painting murals. And indeed there are indications that this is one of the first known walls he painted. The owner keeps the shades drawn in the downstairs parlor, and the walls are in pristine condition. Notable in this room are the use of buff yellow clouds, the Masonic symbol within the branches of the overmantel tree, islands of a more rounded shape and boats more primitive than his later work. He also used very few stencils, which indicates an early wall. Enduring features of future walls are the little man sailing a small boat, seen again in other murals, the harbor scene with boats and little islands reflected in the water, the strong yellow ochre and reeds and grasses used in the foreground, and trees painted as large as possible, which lend a sense of distance to the receding landscape. The shading of trees in light and shadow is evident from the beginning. Between the 2 front windows in every house, fronds overarch an individualized scene, in this case 2 little evergreen trees. The frieze of hand-painted vines with sponged foliage sprouts stenciled leaves. The vines are rooted at the chair rail and grow upward in the corners of the room from there, diverging near the ceiling to travel across the top of the walls in either direction. They are stenciled here in a dark green. A spreading over-door design complements the frieze and fills that space. House painters in those days were decorative painters. In addition to stenciling and painting murals, Rufus Porter painted the cartouches of strawberries and roses on the mantel woodwork. He grained the front edges of the bookcases. Few surfaces were left untouched. He even painted the baseboards using 4 different graining techniques around the room. We are now in the upstairs bedchamber. Significant in this room is the vivid orange sunset of cumulus clouds against which all the foreground mountains, hills, and water appear as in silhouette. The unusual palette of color is limited to somber black, gray, and brown, which contrast with the orange-pink of the sunset and yellow-green of the foliage. The same vine frieze as is painted in the parlor appears above the sponged treescape, but the color of the stenciled leaf has changed to a yellow-green from the blue-green of the downstairs parlor. 4 large trees evenly placed fill the space from mantel to frieze. The panel between the 2 front windows is simply decorated with 3 trees and overarching fronds. The little house is one of the few stencils found in this room. It is placed on the yellow-green foreground and backed by the vivid orange sunset. This house would not be shown complete without a peek into the Moses Eaton stenciled room behind the fancifully grained door, which is attributed to Rufus Porter. Here on a sunny yellow background, we see the green and red stenciled images of Moses Eaton. 120 years later, the heavy oiled brown paper stencil patterns he used to create this wall were found under the attic eaves of his home, thereby enabling researcher Janet Waring to place the stenciler's name with his work for posterity. It is said that beneath a coat of paint in the hallway is another Rufus Porter mural, the rising sun on the east wall and a smiling moon on the west. The Moses Kent House in Lyme, New Hampshire was built in 1811 and is one of 2 remaining of the 7 houses in that town known to have had murals. There are 2 rooms and a hallway painted with murals which are for the most part in very good shape and filled with many stencils. Beginning in the upstairs bedchamber on the near end of the west wall are a red house and 2 trees, which will be repeated in mirror image at the far end of the same wall. The special panel between the 2 front windows with overarching fronds frames a curious little academy or capitol building with an avenue of trees leading to the river and a grouping of 3 large apple trees. The second red house and trees, viewed now from the opposite side, turns the corner to the north wall, and the scene extends to include mountains and a hillside of apple trees. Beyond an intervening window appears a stenciled yellow house behind which grows a very realistic stand of trees. Above the mantel on the east wall, situated on a gently rising hillside, is a small village, bordered by a white rail fence. The little houses and meeting house all done by stencils. Filling the space above and leading the eye to the overmantel scene are branches leaning over it from the left and the right. This technique is employed over and over again in the Rufus Porter School of Mural Painting. The main trunk of the tree is broken off beside the woodwork, and a single branch extends into the mural. The right-hand side in this case is enclosed by the airy foliage of a beautiful symmetrical elm tree, which fills the entire space available. As we turn to the harbor view on the south wall, we can see that someone was tempted enough to paint over the once gray water with blue. In these earliest of murals, blue was not in the color palette. Yet the scene is still beautiful, with a fully rigged clipper ship, full-sized elm tree with delicately sponged foliage, and a little island atop which perch a school, meeting house, and dormitory, all with yellow doors. A grained door also attributed to Porter. The longest expanse of upper hallway reveals a mural entirely painted freehand. Included are many of the techniques we have come to expect. The tree branch leans in from the woodwork of the doorway, its trunk rooted in the foreground, as are 2 shrubs and 2 other full-scale trees, one being the familiar elm. The scene recedes with nearer to farther hills topped with bright or less bright yellow as they retreat into the background. Every hill is planted with trees proportionate to their distances. A middle ground hill is covered by an apple orchard, and in the last distance rise the mountains. They are effectively formed with a medium gray, highlighted with a stroke of white, and shaded to the opposite side with strokes of a darker gray. Bypassing a grained door, where a branch leans from the door casing woodwork into the mural, one is startled to see a chartreuse federal house. It appears to have been stenciled with the same brush used to work sunny yellow into the first and middle distance green ground. By examining this scene, it is clear that a consistent light source, in Porter's mind, shines from the left. Tree trunks, foliage, and the house itself is lighted on the left and similarly shaded on the right. Upon observing the cedar trees, it can be seen that a base coat of a medium green has been applied with the stroke of a brush. The foliage then overlaid in a herringbone pattern, yellow toward the source of light and dark gray or black opposite. In like manner, the other evergreen was created by a squiggly motion of the brush for the base coat, and the strokes for the foliage applied on a more parallel plane. The opposing wall is the head of the stairs. There is the same federal house in reverse, but painted white. The land falls away down the staircase in a forest of trees, which is met further down by a series of boulders, over which tumble streams of water which at the end disappear behind the base of a huge tree. This tree in this house is unfortunately lost, but we will see another example of this most wonderful Porter trademark in the next New Hampshire house. In the downstairs hallway beside the staircase is a design totally effective in its simplicity. The background, not even blended, appears slapped on, and the trees and foreground shrubs could hardly be more reduced in form. The foliage was stippled in with the blunt bristles of a brush. Behind the door on the south wall of the parlor, we find a well-appointed, shuttered colonial house with hipped roof and L. The 8/8 windows, side lights, and fanlight detail are all applied by hand with a small brush. A large waterfall plunges over the edge on the adjoining wall. None of the New Hampshire murals has been found to be signed, although a later Massachusetts wall was signed R. Porter, beside just such a waterfall. Windmills are occasionally seen, like the wind-driven grist mills that he built in his youth. The overmantel in this room was pictured in Gene Lippman's book, Rufus Porter, Yankee Pioneer. The colors are still clear and strong. The 8 little stenciled houses which comprise the village are built on a swell of land and are enclosed by a white painted fence. On an abruptly rising hillside to the left of the village is placed an oversized observatory. Small wonder Porter was intrigued by the Portland Observatory. Its construction in 1807 propelled Portland into a major seaport. From its telescope on a clear day, ships could be seen approaching the harbor from 30 miles out to sea. The harbor scene of islands and boats is purported to be Portland Harbor. It is a view that Rufus Porter surveyed for years as a young man living there. On a rocky bluff stands a lighthouse, possibly Portland Headlight. A sailboat and a clipper ship safely navigate the harbor. Once again stand the huge symmetrical elm as grand as possible, and the solitary branch reaching out from the woodwork. The L of this New Hampshire house was built and occupied first in 1792, and the main part, which contains the murals, was built later in 1812. The house was purchased at auction in 1986 by 2 sisters in their 80s. The front door had been open to the weather for 15 years, and the attic had been home to raccoons. Yet the murals, a monochrome in the hallway, or what Porter called claro obscuro, and the colored mural in the parlor remain in remarkably good condition. The ladies set about restoring the house and added beautiful flower beds seen through the breezeway to the backyard. Porter's monochrome walls have been discovered in gray, umber, stone green, and plum red. The hallway is an excellent example of early work. The background in this case is entirely gray, and the detail of light and shadow accomplished with black and white. It is clean and simple and mostly devoid of genre scenes, although there is a little man fishing on this point of land. It has been estimated that these murals were painted circa 1825, when Porter was known to operate from a flat-bottomed boat on the Connecticut River. Here is a wonderful example of the hallway tree, which he painted over and over again. It is rooted at the foot of the stairs and leans forward, avoiding the overhang of the upstairs hallway as it extends the full 2 stories. A very spare scene of stones fills the stretch of space to the top of the stairs. At the end of the hall is a herd of 4 stenciled cows with tails and horns added by hand, a little observatory, and a house which seem painted rather than stenciled, as are several others on these early walls. The cumulus clouds are notable for the brush strokes still visible in the thick white paint. For a surreal moment, the spreading elm is seen to have been the means by which the raccoons ascended to the attic. There must have been something initially to climb on. Then they gained purchase in a hole on the wall and scratched their way up through the tree limbs to the attic, from where a farmer told the ladies that he used to see them little faces looking out the attic window when he went to milk his cows. Once again, a grained door of imitation crotch mahogany. The north wall in the colored parlor shows us the same red house seen twice in the cookhouse in Lyme, the herd of cows, and a hillside with observatory. It is flying 2 flags which, from its superior vantage point on the hill, informed the townspeople below of the identity of the laden vessels sailing into harbor. On the middle panel between the 2 front windows of the downstairs parlor is preserved a row of little soldiers. They are the Portland Light Infantry, of which Porter was a registered member from 1812 to 1814. Here they stand in full regalia, jackets and pantaloons with contrasting piping, black hats with red plumes, shiny buckles, and little shoes seemingly in ballet positions, muskets at the ready. The soldiers practiced maneuvers below the Portland Observatory on Munjoy Hill, seen here on the left, overlooking Portland Harbor. In the murals of this room is captured that complete slice of Porter's life: the soldiers, the observatory, Munjoy Hill, and Portland Harbor, which became a theme depicted on wall after wall. The tiny town painted by hand represents early development. The house and outbuildings belong to Lemuel Moody, who was responsible for the building of the observatory and manned it all of his life. The harbor contains 6 boats, 4 day sailors, a clipper ship, and most noteworthy of all, a steamship. It is said around these parts that Robert Fulton and Samuel Morey, a local inventor, developed the first steamboat at the same time, but Fulton got the patent first. A later Massachusetts mural depicts the same steamboat with the initials JDP on the wheel. This was Jonathan D. Poor, Porter's nephew, and perhaps offers a clue as to who painted with him on these walls. Built in 1824, the Dodge-Grimm House contains a small mural in the breakfast nook. It still maintains its picket fence on Main Street, as do a number of other old dwellings. The fences were necessary to keep the droves of animals from straying into yards, as they were being herded down Main Street to barns at the Hancock Inn, seen here. That was then, and this is now. The wall has sustained some repair due to water damage. This is the original panel found under 14 layers of wallpaper. It remains untouched except for the blue added to the once gray water. The harbor scene simple, with its one clipper ship. The sign outside the John Hancock Inn in Hancock, New Hampshire, informs us that it was built in 1789 and is the oldest continuously operating inn in the state of New Hampshire. Knowledgeable guests can request to sleep in the Rufus Porter bedchamber, which offers a rare and exciting opportunity to see, study, and enjoy an actual Rufus Porter wall. The room was overpainted probably in the 1940s or 50s, resulting in a fresh and dense appearance of the foliage. Judging from a panel preserved in a front room closet, shown here, the foreground would have been a yellow ochre and the sky and water gray, like other walls of this early period. However, the initial layout of the mountains, water, islands, trees, buildings, and hillsides are all intact. There are a number of special features of his work depicted here which are not commonly seen on every wall. The overmantel contains a rather large palm tree. It is placed there from memory, a vision from Porter's earlier clipper ship voyage to Hawaii, then known as the Sandwich Islands. An interesting technique to create the illusion of distance is seen in the two little trees viewed between the trunks of a large foreground tree. The White Mountains of New Hampshire are indeed white. They are presented almost as snow cones. From the time Rufus Porter was a lad, he viewed the presidential range from his home in Baldwin, Maine, in Fryeburg, Maine, where he was schooled, and Portland, Maine, where he lived and worked as a young man. The special panel between the two front windows shows water and 3 evergreen trees of 2 types with overarching fronds. Every other panel between the windows and door construction is treated with a full-sized tree, several different varieties being represented, and includes 2 or 3 small trees growing at a distance against the background. The few buildings on the island, with the addition of one, are the same grouping seen in the Prescott homestead in nearby Jaffrey, New Hampshire. The only other stencil seen here is the small building in the overmantel scene, perched on a sloping hillside, the hillside slightly offset to the mantel. The little house is bordered by an apple orchard to the left, surrounded by a scattering of evergreen trees, and framed to the left and the right by a large overhanging branch and an elm tree. The Cobb House was moved 1/4 mile and in its new location rotated to a different axis. There are only 2 buildings in this mural, and they appear above the mantel: the hipped roof colonial homestead and the 3-story brick. A steep hillside, as seen in other murals, rises to the left of center. A little alley of trees leads to the top, but if there was once an observatory, as seen in other murals, it was somehow lost to the pipe of a wood stove once inserted into the wall here, its former hole now replastered. The overall aspect is one of gray, which appears to have been painted from ceiling to chair rail, with green and yellow brought in over. This wall has never been touched and is a wonderful example of Porter's full-blown skill in what Jean Lippman describes as his primitive phase of painting. There are no fewer than 7 different kinds of trees depicted in the entire mural. Here we see a tree painted as large as possible to the left of the door, and the beginning of the harbor scene, which will be seen continued to the right of the door. There has been a small leak here, but to their credit, the owners have not allowed anyone short of a preservationist to make repairs. 6 boats sail in the harbor. Pencil lines can be seen depicting the rigging, which have never been painted. One feels as if one sees all the original work of tiny detail. Very simple and realistic is the shading of the rocks, using only 3 colors: the medium gray for the solid shape, highlighted and shaded, with light gray and black. The reflection of the islands has all been done by a solid line of black and little waves added with a small brush. Porter's signature motif, the little man in a boat, all decked out in formal attire, top hat and tails, is wearing yellow pants. His hand is on the tiller. In the fields of the background we see cross-hatching of the little hedgerows, and in middle ground small identical trees, more or less evenly spaced one from another. Here we see an excellent example of the structure of the tree foliage. A mid-value gray or gray-green solid undercoat was applied, and then black stippled into the shaded side and yellow-green to the sunny side. In the middle of the tree, where the transition of dark to light foliage occurs, there appear to be brushstrokes applied by hand, defining clusters of leaves. Over the 175 years since being painted, the yellow-green has faded, so that we may assume that the wall was once a stronger and brighter yellow-green here in the trees and in the middle ground, where these colors were also used. On the next panel to the right of the window, distant trees are indicated in the background, the trunks of which are tiny lines hardly bigger than a single hair, a black one on the left, followed by a white one on the right. Foliage is indicated by the single light touch of a small, stiff-bristled brush. The main trunks of the orchard appear so precise as to have been applied by stencil, the highlighted side painted by hand. The usual tree is broken off by the gunstock beam, and its solitary branch extends into the mural. The last wall shows us a mountain range, every brushstroke visible. The large foreground trees are painted with striations of black up the middle of the trunks in imitation of bark. On the far side of the same wall are small trees and a full-sized cluster of tree trunks, the fugitive yellow-green of the left foliage lost to time and sunlight. The middle panel between the 2 front windows displays 2 varieties of evergreen trees backed by mountains. The ever-present fronds grow from 2 trees rooted left and right, which hug the woodwork until such time as they overarch the 3 trees. The middle and foregrounds are hastily applied so that one can believe Porter when he proclaimed that he could complete a full-sized room in 5 hours. For this he charged $10. The Hall Hayes House, built in 1780, is located on the old Dublin Road, a short distance from the Hancock Inn. Uncovered from layers of wallpaper, this small room is an example of faded glory. Unencumbered by color, one is fully able to appreciate the design, as Rufus Porter called his work. On these walls we glimpse the undercoats. Left to the imagination is the mature treatment of color of Porter's primitive phase, so evident in the Cobb House, which once sat only yards distant from this one. Here we see that same ship. The horizon line is defined by a blush of color. All the islands are seen with a faint, bright yellow hue on top. Little evergreens are placed, and the bare branches of once leafed elms stand in the middle distance and foreground. The large island he continued around the corner, and placed upon it a small tree at the end, which, with the branches of a large elm on the right, frames 2 little sailboats on the horizon. Another island is finished left of the window by a mid-sized tree. A cone-shaped violet mountain is right of the window. Included also is water and a hillside with the vestiges of 2 buildings, which may represent this particular house. A little path running left to right and two large trees add interest to the foreground. The federal part of this house, which contains the stencils, was added to the 1790s structure in 1825. It is known as the John A. Prescott homestead. The front of the house is embellished with a Palladian window, and the front door has leaded fan and side lights. There is much ornamental trim work. The homestead at one time was painted with murals in the upstairs and downstairs hallways and in the upstairs and downstairs southwest rooms. Today, only the upstairs bedchamber survives in toto. There are a number of remarkable things to observe here. The overmantel is in only fair condition, but two buildings can be seen and may represent the family's businesses, the Prescott Tavern and the mill. A little road travels in front of them, coming from the left and disappearing off the right side of the mantel. There is a distant mountain range, and at least 16 evergreens stand about the scene. In the entire room, with the exception of the north wall and two elms and a palm tree on the east wall, there appear only evergreen trees, and they are seen in all sizes in abundance. There is no actual chair rail, but one is indicated by a painted line, below which is painted another unrelated mural in gray monochrome. This one is in very poor condition. Most startling to see in these murals are the two erupting volcanoes and a palm tree. These oddities for a New England landscape are memories from 1817 to 1819, when Porter voyaged to the Hawaiian Islands. The north wall contains many notable features. It is the first room we have seen of this early period where blue has been deliberately added to the palette of colors. The sky is a light blue, and the 6 mountains are painted in a strong Prussian blue. White cumulus clouds are not only stacked behind the mountains, but float among the branches of the triplet trees, which are remarkable in their own right. The trunks of the trees are semi-transparent, and through them can be seen the transition of foreground to mountains and mountains to sky. Light and shadow have been indicated by white lines painted on the left of the trunks to represent light from the window on the left, and dark lines painted on the opposite sides of the trunks for shadow. A large building in the foreground with a peculiar dome may represent the State House in the capital of Concord, New Hampshire, where Porter had been living. Hand-painted rose stems with sponged foliage grow stenciled rosebuds. They climb up the corners of the room to diverge at the top of the wall, where they travel left and right around the room, seemingly to create a bower of budded roses. In the corner of the north wall, where it joins the east wall, is a disjointed transition of land masses. It appears that Porter began his work on the east wall with a sunrise and harbor scene, and ended awkwardly on the north wall. Later instruction to his readers in his publication Curious Arts cautioned against this situation. He advised, "Just build a tree over it." Here again, miles from the ocean, we see between the branches of 2 elm trees his best loved view. Little cedar trees march almost equidistantly around the shoreline, and on the island stand 3 buildings, the 2 on the left repeated over the mantel. A little galleon, an anachronism even in Porter's day, leaves the harbor under full sail and with a favorable breeze. His signature man in a small boat sails out to sea. Amusingly, he has a little caricature of a face, and the tails of his coat appear close to dragging in the water. The panel between the 2 front windows shows us a tiny house surrounded by 9 evergreen trees, and below, in the monochrome, a volcano erupting in fire and smoke. The remaining panels show us more blue sky, more rosebuds, more Prussian blue mountains, more yellow ochre foreground, and many more evergreen trees. Only the overmantel has been preserved in the downstairs room. It shows Porter's interpretation of Dartmouth College buildings with horse sheds. The same scene was painted in the Prescott Tavern, demolished in 1950. The sun of knowledge rises over the eastern hills. A picture from Gene Lippman's book, Rufus Porter, Yankee Pioneer, enabled me to reproduce this panel in my own home. Gene Lippman's research finds that 1824 to 1830 was Porter's early period. In the attic of this home is an intriguing artifact, a date of 1830 painted in early script on a wide board. The owners of this 1700s cape were visited a number of years ago by an elderly lady who said as a child she picked at the wallpaper and discovered the murals, which her parents uncovered. Parts of 3 walls remain which are in poor condition, but the layout of scenery can be discerned and has some intriguing features. The north wall exhibits mountain ranges and a major central tree like the triplet trees in the Prescott homestead. Across the top of the hillside runs a little fox, chased by a floppy-eared dog. The animals are stenciled, and little ears, noses, and on the dog a fatter tail and spots added by hand. The west wall displays a blush of sunset. There is the same galleon as seen in the Prescott homestead. The sky and water are blue, and a rosebud vine trails across the top of the wall, although the buds are both smaller, as is the room smaller, than the Prescott house. To the left of the wall is a toy replica of the same galleon, the string of which is held by a gentleman on the shore. To the right of that are 6 geese taking flight. On the south wall, which is in poorest condition, a river dissects the foreground, falling right to left, at the edge of which stands a building which perhaps represents a mill, as there are 3 small houses surrounding it, which could belong to working families. Such small houses and mill were built at the Prescott homestead in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. It would be interesting research to discover if the owners of these houses were in any way connected, or was it just by Porter's hand. Lafayette visited the Adams Female Academy in 1824, and astronaut Alan Shepard was a student here. The murals were found under an overlaid false wall. What is seen is in good shape. The damage is in the form of missing chunks of plaster and graffiti by the students. Rufus Porter taught a technique in wall decoration to a number of young men. It was his hope that there would be a great demand for painted decoration, which, unlike wallpaper, was inexpensive and did not afford a resting place for insects. The painter of this wall received Porter's instruction, but necessarily his own skill and artistry prevailed. His work is more painterly, and he appears to have been a master of blue mountains, water, sky, and clouds. He is in possession of the Rufus Porter stenciled buildings, but spreads them further apart, interspacing them with trees. The middle ground hills in soft colors are actually more realistic. The largest but less substantial trees never fill the space allowed from chair rail to ceiling. Nevertheless, their placement, rooted in the foreground, does cause the scene to recede. Both trunks and foliage are highlighted, though there are subtle differences in technique. Many clusters of brushstrokes indicate sunlit leaves, and in most trees much red has been added. The hedgerow detail is painted in black, the foreground is muddy, and the islands lack definition, as if this student of Porter's had never seen Portland Harbor. I hope you've enjoyed learning about Rufus Porter the artist. He and his students painted from 1824 to 1845 in New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts, resulting in hundreds of walls, many now lost to fire, demolition, or overpainting, or hidden behind layers of wallpaper. Porter's instruction is as relevant today as it was to his students. With today's technology and easily obtained paints and stencils, one is assured of even greater success. Since 1994, MB Historic Decor has offered early American stencils for walls and floors. With the production of the 5th and new catalog of Rufus Porter stencils, we will have 430 stencils available for anyone wishing to recreate a historic stenciled wall or floor, or wall mural combining freehand painting and stencils.